this team's philosophy seems to be more, okay, it's cool with running. We'll give up some yards. We'll try to get them to third down and short. But, unfortunately, it seems like a lot of those first and second down plays are going for pretty good gains, and they're really not even getting to too many third downs as a result. So I think, to some degree, schematically, the linebackers are sort of being put in a tough position. At the end of the day, I think everyone starts, pointing fingers and questioning when your team's not playing well. Like I'm sure, some of these defensive players for the Eagles were like loving the defense, and they thought it was great after the Atlanta game. They're like, damn, we're rolling, like we're playing good. And now all of a sudden they're looking around and they're saying, oh, is it the scheme? Is it what's going on? Like, I don't like playing this. And
appreciate you tuning in to Birds 365 with the Mac and Mac guys, Joe McDonald, John McMullen. Joining us is a guest who had previously been part of the show. We'll have him back again today, former Eagles assistant coach Ryan Paganetti. Hops aboard Birds 365. What's the hat say there, Ryan? I can't make out that.
That's FTL Fort Lauderdale.
Fort Lauderdale, yeah, that's my favorite airport. If you're flying into Miami, you got to fly into Fort Lauderdale. You got to make the trek up. So, Fort Lauderdale. So hopefully you're feeling better. Ryan is in South Florida these days, and so you're a little bit far away. You're obviously not the building anymore, Ryan. But I just wanted to get your early impressions as a former, game day management assistant for Doug Pederson. What are your first impressions of Nick Sirianni as far as accepting sort of those advanced data points when it comes to an ever-evolving league?
So I think he's definitely a little bit more conservative than Coach Pederson, but it seems some of these somewhat close calls, he's leaning a little bit more towards field goals or punts. But that being said, he's not completely resistant to it. Like, they have gone for some fourth down attempts. They've gone for some 2-point conversions where it sort of made sense from an analytics standpoint. But, I think he sort of manages some of these situations a little bit differently. Or in particular, some of the 2-minute situations, he seems a little bit, he's handling his timeouts a little bit differently than maybe the typical analytics recommendation. But, I think overall, certainly, some first-year head coaches struggle with some of this stuff, but I think it's been okay. Like, it hasn't really been a complete deal breaker or anything like that. And, I think he's definitely still a little bit more aggressive than some of these old-time coaches that have, been in the league for 20, 30 years, and they have their way of doing things, and they're going to, kick their field goals on 4th and 1 and 4th and 2. And I think he's definitely a little more aggressive than that.
I'm going to go Mike Zimmer on you for one. But
yeah.
Ryan, I want to make a comparison and have you help me understand something. And I readily admit you're up here and I was somewhere down here. I played Division III college basketball, and then I got hurt, and it just wasn't. There's no chance of me going to play anymore, so I became a broadcaster. But I wanted to stay involved in basketball, so I became a referee. First in athletics within the university. And then when I graduated from college, I actually continued to do it on a high school level. It took me 3 friggin' years to get it out of my system. When I would watch a basketball game, I would watch it from the perspective of the referee. Now, I'm a player my whole life. I'm a fan, but I'm watching basketball, and I'm watching it through the referee's eyes. And I couldn't stop. And I just done it for about 2 years, but it became part of my way of watching basketball. You're a coach. You're not coaching now. When you sit down and watch the Eagles or anybody else, how do you watch a game?
So I think I'm a little bit in a similar stance where, almost every 4th down or 2-point conversion or, certain situation, I'm thinking of like, all right, how would I have done this? And sometimes some of the things these coaches are doing are kind of making my hair, I want to pull my hair out, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, I would do that differently. But, I think it's nice to sort of relax. I mean, I was, it was 7 days a week, like 100+ hours a week work. The most deflating thing to me would be the night games. And I think, that might've played into the Kansas City game, but, you lose a night game and it's on the road and you're flying back, they probably left Dallas at like 2 a.m. They get in maybe like 6.
they got back at 5. Yeah.
Yeah, they want to jump right back in and go right to the office on limited sleep, and everyone's miserable. And I think that really can kind of drag on people. And for me right now, I'm like, yep, I can just go to bed, sleep in. I'm like, this isn't too bad. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of nice. I mean, obviously, I want to see the Eagles be successful. My brother's still there, but not having to overly stress about things is a little bit more peaceful.
Well, I want to talk about a stressful situation because it happened early against Kansas City, and I want to look at this from two different perspectives. The opponent, because I want to know how that changes things from your thinking, Ryan. The fact that Kansas City is going to score some points. Mm-hmm. You're sitting there at 4th and 3, I think. The decision was go for it, which I thought was the right decision for the Eagles. Then whatever happened, the communication, Shane Steichen said they called a play you could kill. So essentially 2 plays at 1, clock's running down. They call timeout. The decision, they go out and kick the field goal. So one, the decision to kick the field goal, but the other, how does it change when you're playing a different team? I mean, Kansas City's just more explosive than everybody else. So that has to change your thinking, doesn't it, if you're playing a team that struggles offensively?
Yeah, I think, in general, you probably have some kind of baseline case. Okay, like if we're roughly average, they're roughly average. This isn't, a normal NFL situation. This is how we would sort of handle these situations. And even in those sort of normal situations, I would have, sort of recommended a 4th and 3 would be a little bit towards going for it, even if you're going up against an average opponent there. But once you sort of have that baseline and maybe you go into the season at this is what we're going to do, typically you have to make some kind of opponent adjustment, particularly factoring in, a very talented offense. And, of course, I think the Eagles were pretty significant underdogs. They were the Chiefs were projected going into the game, score 30 or 31 points. And I think, all those variables would tilt you in those scenarios that are sort of close calls to just, lean towards being more aggressive for sure. I'm not so sure. It was a little bit confusing. Maybe to me, it appears that maybe they thought that the timeout was not called and it was a delayed game instead, or because it just doesn't add up to go for the 4th down and then call timeout and send the field goal unit out, because you really have plenty of time, after the timeout to get your call in and everything. I think the most important thing from just my experience is that if you're communicating information to the head coach, whether it's 2nd or 3rd down, the head coach also wants to know, or he has to make that decision as quickly as possible in the play clock, because Doug always did a great job of really deciding, probably by 35, 36 seconds in the play clock, okay, are we going for it? So he can go to his menu of plays and pick out the best one. But if you sit there and you take an extra 5-6 seconds and then you're calling a play with a kill on it, and Jalen Hurts maybe doesn't even get the play call, or they don't break the huddle until too late and they have 2 plays called, and that process, really isn't ideal. And in particular, having to use a timeout, you'd never want to have to use a timeout to make these decisions. You always want to, make the decision as swiftly as possible and operate normally, because ultimately you saw at the end of the first half, the Eagles really could have used an extra timeout because they sort of were rushing on their 2-minute drive. So, I always sort of prided myself with the Eagles. If we got to the 2-minute warning and we still had all 3 timeouts, I'm like, yeah, we're in a good spot. We got a good shot here to, use these timeouts to maybe score some points to end the half. But, it's never really ideal when you're ripping timeouts on offense early on in the game. And then maybe you might need them at the end of this first half or end of the game for, getting the ball back or something.
Ryan, your gig with the Eagles as an assistant coach was multifaceted, one of which was assistant linebackers coach. The Eagles had the linebackers that they had while you were there. They got the linebackers now. John and I talk about it all together too often here on Birds 365 as an organization. Before Ryan Paganetti got there, since he's left, going back, 3 decades, the Eagles have not put an emphasis on linebackers, at least in McMullen's opinion. They've got the group they've got right now. How would you as a coach say they're playing. That's part of your job as a coach, to evaluate how your players are playing. You know the system you've got them in. You know what you're asking them to do. From afar, how would you say this Eagle linebacker crew is playing?
I think they're doing okay. I mean, it's ultimately you look at year over year, the investment of resources at linebacker, how much of the cap is spent there. It's always near the bottom with the Eagles. That's just, a philosophy of the organization. I mean, certainly from my perspective, being in the linebacker room every day, I certainly would have liked, if you spent some first round picks or like went out in free agency and got some guys, but that's just not what they were going to do. And the guys that have been there, they've really kind of battled and done the best they could in those situations they've been presented. But, I think just there's some things that are almost out of their control. Like if I know there was a play there in like the goal line where there was a linebacker lined up on Tyreek Hill. And it's like, I don't know how many linebackers in the NFL would have a good shot there. So, I think one of the challenges, with the Eagles they play so much too high, is that in the run game, you're a little bit light in terms of numbers. So these linebackers have to make some plays and it's sort of been tough because, they've gone up against some pretty good run teams and, the offensive lines they're going up against have been pretty good. And it's just been a sort of a challenge when you don't have enough numbers in the box, like you're always sort of, you're almost hoping that a D lineman just makes a ridiculous play like Hargrave, who has made some great plays. Mm-hmm. But if your defensive line is not making a difference making play and you just have light numbers, it's really tough. And that was something with Coach Schwartz that he was, very consistent about first and second downs. We were going to have a heavy box and we were going to make it hard for that team to run. They might hit us on some passes, but ultimately we're going to get them in a lot of third and longs and allow our pass rush to get after them. But this team's philosophy seems to be more, okay, it's cool with running. We'll give up some yards. We'll try to get them to third down and short. But, unfortunately, it seems like a lot of those first and second down plays are going for pretty good gains, and they're really not even getting to too many third downs as a result. So I think, to some degree, schematically, the linebackers are sort of being put in a tough position. Obviously, if you're playing zone and they're putting receivers on the interior, like they're lined up at number 3 in a formation, that's – you end up having to cover them. It's a tough deal. So I think they're battling. I think, they'll be okay.
And Ryan, I want to talk about the game day management part of it and being in the ear of the head coach, because we talked a little bit about that, 40-second clock. Things happen really, really quickly in the NFL. You mentioned you got to make that decision really quickly. If it's to go for it, not to go for it, got to get the play in quickly. The Eagles, and Nick has now been on record saying they have this system where he calls the play, tells Shane Steichen. Shane Steichen is the one who gives it to Jalen Hurts, which to an outsider like me seems like a bit of redundancy. You're adding a layer to it. Is that layer needed? Why would a coach do that? Is it going to create problems when you have such a small amount of time? What's your experience being in the ear of the head coach at times?
Yeah, so I do. When I heard that, I was a little bit concerned, from a game management perspective, the less layers and the less friction between getting the plays in, because again, like I mentioned earlier, saving those timeouts as much as possible and making these decisions quickly so you're not really in rush situations is really sort of ideal process. And, to have, say that the head coach maybe takes a few extra seconds to decide on a fourth down, then he calls a play at 25 seconds. And then the offensive coordinator has to relay that into Jalen and say it's a long play because you have some kill in it. And all of a sudden you're really running short on time. And we tried at one point to have, we had some coaches that were a little bit more involved with calling plays in 2-minute situations. I think we had like Rich Scangarello last year calling some of that a little bit. And I think the play calls were good and they were fine. But, there were some times too where it was a little bit of an unusual deal because he'd be up in the booth, call it, and then Doug would relay it. Or, maybe Doug didn't exactly want to do that exact play, or particularly when time is really valuable. I think, it's a sort of difficult operating situation. And from my perspective, from a game management perspective, I would certainly prefer if, I was just communicating information directly to the play caller and the play caller just calls it right into the quarterback and that's how you sort of operate. But, they have a process. And realistically, they've been pretty good on offense. Some situational stuff maybe, hasn't been ideal, like the red zone stuff, but they're moving the ball. And I think, that's promising going forward, that they are, managing to move the ball fairly effectively up and down the field. So, it'll be interesting to kind of see how that shakes out. But I haven't heard of too many teams that have a process where, they might have an analytics person helping and then have somebody calling a play to somebody else who then calls a play. And I think that's a little bit of a tough process.
Ryan, I'm not sure if you're completely suited to answer. No, you're more suited than John or I. But because you did your work in the press box, maybe this isn't a question you can answer with 100% assuredness. I mentioned this earlier on the show. I mentioned it the last couple of weeks here on the show. The Eagles miss Brandon Graham. They miss him as a player for his capabilities, for damn sure, but they also miss his leadership. And I don't want to say the Eagles look rudderless on defense, but they look like they're lacking something. And I think leadership is part of it. And I think Brandon Graham not being there is part of it as well. Am I overstating things? Can players take leadership from their teammates on the field and help raise their game? Is that something guys like me and the media just make up and it isn't really a fact of life in the NFL? Or is it? I know you weren't down there on the field. Yeah. If you were on a game in, game out, play in, play out basis, you might have a better read on it, but you're there during practice all week long. How much can a guy's individual leadership be missed when he's taken off a team?
I think you can really feel it, when you have these tone setters or these high character players, these leaders of your team that, it's always great when the highest paid players or the veterans of the team are also really hardworking. They grind in the weight room. You see that with New England, Tom Brady, people who go to New England practices or then now Tampa practices, they'll tell you that you think they're getting ready for the Super Bowl every single week with how, Tom treats everybody in practice and the tone that he sets. And, I even saw, when we were playing and we had Jordan Hicks, the Eagles Super Bowl year, and he was a good player, but he had an unfortunate injury. But, he was a leader of the defense, middle linebacker, and he stayed really involved with the team. He on a weekly basis, he was in all these meetings. He was always helping out the younger guys. He was on the sideline helping out, giving guys tips. And I think, that's something that really was important and valuable. And to me, I think if I was going to pinpoint, what's going on with the Eagles defense, I'm not so sure it's just exclusively the Brandon Graham situation. I think there's a couple things going on there. The first being that no one really knew what they were going to be doing on defense going into week one. So I think, that sort of threw off Atlanta. And now that they sort of have tape of okay, we're going to do this 3-4-2 gap in front a lot. And I think, these other teams have been able to game plan some, run concepts and, how they're going to attack there. I think, I do think with losing Brandon Graham, they're now asking some of these guys to line up in certain ways. Like there's this 4-eye technique inside the tackles. And, they're asking them to sort of 2-gap at times and line up in ways that maybe isn't what they're used to in their experience, whether that's Ryan Kerrigan or Josh Sweat or these guys, maybe they don't have the body types to really do what they're being asked to do. And I think as a result, you're seeing some struggles in the run game in particular. And I think, ultimately, I certainly anticipate the Eagles are going to eventually make some adjustments here where they're going to play more one-high defenses and, play a little bit more man-to-man and challenge these guys. But it's interesting, their philosophy has seemed to be, we're going to sort of just let you keep everything in front. And, these last couple teams are like, okay, sounds good. We'll keep in front and we'll just gain 7 yards of play. So I think there's definitely a balance there where, yes, you don't want to give up big plays, but at the same time, you don't want to just, consistently give off, 5, 6, 7, 8-yard gains. So I think you'll see more variation in what they're doing on defense going forward.
Yeah, Ryan, I was talking to Fletch yesterday. And he mentioned the 4-eye technique, and he did not seem happy about it. Playing a little bit out of position to what he's used to, and he liked Jim Schwartz's system, and obviously he could go get the quarterback, and he's one of the best 3 techniques of his generation. Darius Slay, pretty successful actually against Kansas City. He wasn't the problem, but he's more of a man coverage guy, playing a lot of zone. When you have these veteran players who've had success in other systems, how difficult is it to keep those guys? I know you started in 2015. You're still a young man, but from your thought process as a coach, how difficult is that?
At the end of the day, I think that's maybe one of the perils of free agencies. You get these guys that have been taught to do something for 5 years of their life a certain way, and they get comfortable, playing things a certain way, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, welcome over. And that we sort of experienced that a little bit with Hargrave. Not that he, wasn't trying, but he was being asked to do something completely different in Pittsburgh, and we were sort of projecting him to, end up lining up more as a one gap player and penetrating and pass rushing. And he hadn't really done that much. He was reading blocks and things like that. And it was a little bit of a process. But at the end of the day, I think everyone starts, pointing fingers and questioning when your team's not playing well. Like I'm sure, some of these defensive players for the Eagles were like loving the defense, and they thought it was great after the Atlanta game. They're like, damn, we're rolling, like we're playing good. And now all of a sudden they're looking around and they're saying, oh, is it the scheme? Is it what's going on? Like, I don't like playing this. And I think just, from the coaches having a consistent message and making sure whatever you're doing on defense, all 11 guys have to be on the same page, because if anybody is sort of just freelancing or trying to do their own thing, particularly with the run gaps, it can get really ugly really quickly. But, I think it is sort of challenging to have a guy like Slay who's, sort of made his career in the NFL as a man guy, and then you're asking him to play zone at one of the higher rates in the NFL. And maybe it's like not the best use of resources to have a guy like that's whatever he's making $20 million a year to be a zone corner. It's sort of an interesting discussion, but I think, there's going to be some situations here in critical downs, and that they're probably going to play a little bit more man defense, and, put Slay on the best receiver, and, we'll see how that goes.
Another linebacker question for you, Eagles linebacker question, as a matter of fact. Over the last couple of drafts, while you were there, since you left as well, the Eagles have drafted college safeties and targeted moving them to the linebacker position. You have to have a specific body. It's like they're giving you the clay, and the clay was used otherwise. So we want you to remold them here, and we want you to get them up to speed, ready for the season. How difficult a task was it they put the guys like yourself, whose job it was to get these guys converted?
I think one of the benefits, at least with the safety conversion guys, is that the safeties have to know a lot of what's going on for all 11 players. So from a mental standpoint, they were asked to do completely different things in college, but at least, they had, I think, the mental ability to learn. And like we saw that with, I know some people didn't like Nate Gary, but, Nate was a college safety, and he moved and he ended up being the sharpest linebacker that we had ever had, like from a mental standpoint, which was great. But, it's an enormous transition, particularly because these guys are not used to having 300-pound, 330-pound guys getting up on them and, taking on blocks, getting off blocks. All of these offensive linemen in the NFL are, oftentimes significantly better than the players that they're facing in college. And, I think from the run game's perspective, that was really where it was challenging, just because, these guys physically, there was always like like we even had like Kamu, they were just almost undersized. They didn't really know how to do it. They wanted to sort of just jump around blocks rather than take on blocks. And it just wasn't something they were asked to do. And that was a little bit challenging. And I think just organizationally, it seems like the Eagles sort of just don't put a big emphasis on run defense with those linebackers. And they seem to just be more interested in having guys that, can play the pass and stop the pass, which seems to make sense. But, if you're going up against these teams that are pretty run heavy, you might see some of these linebackers that, maybe they're not the greatest run defenders, they may not look their best.
Ryan, I'm glad you said that about Nate, because I would tell Eagles fans how much Ken loved Nate's football IQ, and they would yell at me. And I'm just telling you, he thinks he's the smartest guy. He said he knew more about the linebacker position than him. And that's how Ken Flagel spoke about Nate Gary. But last one for me, and I want to thank you for joining the program again. I mentioned you started with the Eagles in 2015. So, that's not that long of a time. But how much has the game changed with the RPOs in that short amount of time from 2015 to today? Mm-hmm. And, there's a difference. I think a lot of people don't realize with the college and the pro level. offensive linemen are allowed to go downfield farther in college than they are in the pros, and the Eagles keep getting these illegal man downfield penalties.
Mhm.
How difficult is that to teach from both sides, the offensive side, the defensive side, the linebackers, how to read that stuff?
So from our perspective with Coach Schwartz defensively, we were very committed to not letting them get easy throws on the RPOs. So ultimately, most of the RPOs are reading some kind of linebacker to determine whether or not it's a give read. Sometimes it's a safety, but whether they're going to give it or throw it. And the way we ended up sort of coaching it, and I think a lot of teams started coaching it, is, okay, we can't just give up these easy slants or these easy, throws that are, almost a 90% completion rate. So let's slow play the run. And, so what we would usually have our linebackers do is sort of shuffle for a few seconds. And, from the quarterback's perspective, they would interpret that as a read give. But one of the most interesting things was that pretty much nobody was running these RPO concepts prior to our Super Bowl year. And we had sort of added those in that season. And some of these teams had absolutely no idea what the heck was going on. Like, it was, there was guys pass, you'd have linebackers pass dropping 8 yards on run plays, and it was just like the easiest 20+ yard run you could ever even imagine. And I think, Andy sort of took it to another level in the years following that, where it seems like they almost have like pass run options where you don't even really know, are they trying to run it? Are they trying to pass it? What is the read? Like, what is Mahomes doing? But like, either way, it was really tough to stop. And I think you're seeing all sorts of different, concepts. It used to be like most of the concepts on the backside of the RPOs were just slants. And now you're seeing like all sorts of funky things, slants, picks, pick flat. Sometimes guys are just going vertical. Like the Kansas City had one where Tyreek just sprinted down the field on an RPO. They just lob it up to him. So, I think there's all sorts of different variations. It definitely makes it harder and harder to stop because you're particularly when there's a gray area with those offensive lines. And I think, from a defensive coach's perspective, we were so mad whenever there would be offensive linemen, 3-4 yards downfield that was not called. So those plays are getting called. And unfortunately, it's like burned the Eagles a couple times where, I don't know, Dillard had a few that he was down the field. And it's always like a cat and mouse game with the refs. And it's like, come on, man, like that guy's like 2 guys. There was always debates. And, it really is hard for them to officiate too, because sometimes the guy's engaged at 1 and there's like rules of like, okay, if he starts engaged and then he ends up at 2, like how is that officiated for the yards downfield? Like what if it was a circus, honestly. It's really hard to officiate. But it seems like it's a little bit more of an emphasis and, it's kind of hurt the Eagles at times, but at the same time, the RPO concepts they're running seem to be pretty effective in terms of moving the ball. So, I think they just have to clean up some of that stuff a little bit and they'll be fine.
There's an objective guy for you who can actually admit it's kind of difficult to do, referee and national football.
No doubt.
Not all coaches take that attitude. Good for you, Ryan. Last one for me. No, there's some Eagle blood still pumping through your veins. Your brother's still here. You were here as long as you were. Eagles aside, anything else in the National Football League that jumped out at you when you watch on a Sunday afternoon, a Monday night, a Thursday night? You go, damn, that looked good. Damn, if we've been able to do that. Damn, why couldn't we think of something like that? What's jumped out at you this year so far in the first 4 weeks of the NFL?
I think a lot of teams are trying to copy Brandon Staley's 3-4 alignments that he was running. Even the Eagles to some degree with this, it's really kind of like a 3-4 tight front. And teams are trying to go with these a lot more of these 2 high defenses and to try to slow down the pass games. And I think, what usually happens is whatever teams are successful the previous year, you see all these coaching staffs, trying to copycat. And we would do that with Coach Schwartz. We'd go look up, okay, what team led the league in sacks? What team had the best run defense? What team, gave up the fewest yards per play? And realistically, the Rams were number 1 in points allowed, and they were number 1 in, yards per play last year. And I think a lot of teams are trying to implement that stuff. I mean, I've even saw Mike Zimmer, who has run the same sort of concepts for a very long time. He's running these tight fronts. It's like it's a sort of a very unusual thing, but you're seeing, teams, I think, just they're struggling so much against the pass. They're trying to come up with solutions to sort of maybe play later boxes, slow down the pass game a little bit, and then these offenses are responding with more RPOs or more run game stuff, and it's sort of an interesting balance there.
Ryan, good stuff. We appreciate you coming on board. in the FTL. We'll say hello to your brother up here in Philadelphia. Always the best, buddy. Thanks for hopping on with us. We will get you on again somewhere down the line.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Ryan.
That is Ryan Paganetti. John developed a good relationship with him when he was here as a coach here in Philadelphia, and he's good enough to come on with us to give a completely different perspective. We have a lot of different guys come on the show, have different perspectives. Certainly Ryan's is different as well, and we'll continue to tap into him from time to time. He is John McMullen. I am Jody McDonald. We are Mac and Mac on Birds 365. Coming back, put a bow on the show, and promo and appearance by yours truly tonight. Get out of
Oh, yeah. I heard about that.
Media YouTube. Yeah, we'll run that down for you. Coming back next here on Birds 365.